The moment that really stands out is how these scenes feel familiar, almost like something we have already seen before, but with a different energy. When you look closely at the way Destiny and Nell are interacting now, it brings back memories of those older conversations between Melody and Nell. There is a clear attempt to reach that same depth, that same emotional connection. But something about it just does not land the same way. It is not that the conversation is bad, it is just different. And that difference is very noticeable if you have been watching closely for a while. Back then, when Melody would sit with Nell, there was a calm and natural flow. It did not feel forced. It felt like one person was really trying to help the other, and the other person was open to receiving that help. The conversation about therapy is a perfect example of this. Melody did not come across as someone trying to lecture or control the moment. Instead, she spoke with care. She explained things in a way that made Nell feel safe enough to listen. That is why that garden scene became so memorable. It was simple, but it had meaning. Now, when we shift to the present and watch Destiny and Nell at the spa, the setup almost mirrors that earlier moment. You have a calm setting, a relaxed environment, and a conversation that starts light, but slowly moves deeper. On the surface, it feels like it is trying to recreate that same vibe. But as the conversation goes on, you begin to notice the shift. It does not stay grounded in that same emotional space. Instead, it starts to drift into other topics, and the focus changes. At the spa, the conversation begins with something personal, but safe. Nell talks about her store, something she is working on and building for herself. There is emotion tied to it because she mentions her grandmother, and you can feel that this is something close to her heart. That moment had the potential to really go deep, to explore her feelings, her memories, and what this new chapter means to her. And for a brief second, it feels like the conversation might go there. Then Destiny steps in and makes an observation about Nell always carrying other people's burdens. That could have been a powerful moment. That could have opened the door to a real and honest discussion about emotional weight, about family, about stress, and about how people handle all of that. But instead of staying there, the conversation quickly shifts again. This is where the difference becomes clear. With Melody, the conversation would have stayed on that topic a little longer. There would have been more depth, more reflection, and more focus. But here, it moves quickly into updates about other people, other situations, and things happening around them. It becomes less about Nell's internal world and more about external drama. When Destiny mentions therapy, it is interesting because it creates a direct link back to that earlier conversation with Melody. Now Nell is the one saying therapy is a good thing. That shows growth. That shows that the message from before actually stayed with her. But even in that moment, it does not feel as impactful as it did before. It feels more like a passing comment rather than a central part of the discussion. Another important thing to notice is how Nell responds in these different situations. When she was with Melody, she often listened more than she spoke. Some people might see that as her holding back, but it can also be seen as her being thoughtful. She was taking in what was being said. She was processing it. She was allowing the moment to be about understanding rather than reacting.
With Destiny, Nell speaks a bit more, but the conversation does not feel as focused. It goes from one topic to another, and the emotional weight gets lost along the way. It is not that Nell is not capable of having deep conversations. We have already seen that she is. It is more about the dynamic between the two people in the scene. Chemistry plays a big role here. Not every pair of people will create the same kind of energy on screen. Melody and Nell had a certain balance. Melody would guide the conversation, and Nell would respond in her own way. It worked because it felt natural. With Destiny, the balance is different.
It feels like both are trying to lead at different moments, and the conversation does not settle into one clear direction. As the spa scene continues, the focus shifts even more into outside drama. The discussion about Fletcher, Marceau, and the license situation takes over. This is where the tone of the scene changes completely. What started as a calm and reflective moment turns into something more tense and reactive. It becomes about what was said, who said it, and how people feel about it. This kind of shift is important because it shows what the scene is really centered on. Instead of building a deep connection between the two women, it becomes a way to move the storyline forward. It becomes about sharing information and reacting to it, rather than truly connecting on a personal level. When Destiny brings up what Kimmy said about not feeling close enough to reach out, it adds another layer. Now the conversation is not just about events, but also about relationships and boundaries. Nell's response makes it clear that she agrees with that distance. She is not pretending that the relationship is closer than it is. That honesty is important, but it also adds to the feeling that this scene is more about setting positions than building connection. All of this leads to the idea that the scene is trying to recreate something that cannot be easily repeated. The earlier conversations worked because of the people involved, the timing, and the natural flow between them. Trying to create that same feeling with a different dynamic will not always work, even if the setup looks similar. There is also something to be said about how viewers connect to these moments. When people watch a scene that feels real, they remember it. They feel it. That is what happened with those earlier conversations. They stayed with the audience because they felt genuine. When a scene feels like it is trying to reach that same level without the same foundation, it can come across as forced, even if that is not the intention. Another layer to this is the idea of growth and change. People on the show are not the same as they were before. Their experiences, their relationships, and their perspectives have all evolved. So even if a scene looks similar on the outside, it will not feel the same because the people in it are not the same. Nell's journey is a good example of this. She has gone from being someone who was hesitant about therapy to someone who sees its value. That is a big change. That is something that could be explored in a deeper way. But in this scene, it becomes just one part of a larger conversation, rather than the main focus.
Destiny's role in this is also interesting. She is trying to connect, trying to create a space for conversation, but at the same time, she brings in other elements that shift the tone. It creates a mix that does not fully settle into one clear direction. It is like the scene is trying to do too many things at once. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, it becomes clear that the issue is not about one person or one moment. It is about the overall dynamic and how it compares to what came before. The comparison is what makes the difference stand out even more. Viewers naturally compare scenes because they want to understand what feels right and what feels off. When something reminds them of a past moment, they expect a similar impact. When that impact is not there, it becomes noticeable. This does not mean that the current scenes have no value. They still show relationships, growth, and different perspectives, but they serve a different purpose. They are more about moving the story forward than creating those deep, memorable conversations. At the same time, it raises a question about what makes a scene truly impactful. Is it the setting? Is it the topic? Or is it the connection between the people involved? Looking at these two situations, it becomes clear that the connection plays the biggest role. Without that strong connection, even the best setup can fall short. And with a strong connection, even a simple conversation can become powerful. That is what made those earlier moments stand out. As the scene ends, the feeling that remains is one of comparison. It is hard not to think back to what we have seen before and notice the differences. It creates a sense that something is missing, even if everything looks right on the surface. This is why the idea of trying to recreate a moment can be tricky. It is not just about repeating the same elements.
It is about capturing the same feeling, and that is much harder to do. Feelings cannot be copied in the same way. They come from real interactions and real connections. In the end, what we are seeing is a shift in the way these conversations are happening. They are still there, but they are not the same. And that difference is what stands out the most. It is not about saying one is better than the other. It is about recognizing that they are different and understanding why. That understanding helps explain why some scenes stay with us while others do not. It is not just about what is said, but how it is said and who it is shared with. That combination is what creates those moments that people remember.
And as the show continues, it will be interesting to see how these dynamics evolve, whether new connections form that create their own kind of depth, or whether the focus continues to shift in different directions. Either way, these comparisons will always be there because they are part of how viewers experience the story. The conversation between Destiny and Nell is not without meaning. It shows where they are now, what they are dealing with, and how they interact. But when placed next to those earlier moments, it highlights just how important the right connection is in creating something truly impactful. That is what makes the difference so clear, and that is why it stands out the way it does. If you're enjoying the video, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel.